Hi everyone and welcome to a video covering Dune, Spice Wars, Early Access, an overview and my general thoughts on the game. Firstly, many thanks to Shiro Games and Funcom for the key so I was able to take a look at the game in its Early Access form. As ever, I give my honest thoughts regardless of whether a key is free or not, and I don't mark down games for Early Access in terms of bugs and things like that, because I'm expecting them to get fixed. Now for those who don't know, Dune Spice Wars is based on the book series by Frank Herbert. And many of you, like myself, will have seen the movie, but Shiro aimed to make the game more like the books than the movies, where possible at least, keeping in mind the need for a game balance. The game itself is a real-time 4X game. Other games like this which come to mind are Stellaris and the older Distant Worlds. They're a little bit of a time sink, you spend a lot of hours playing them, and that is shown by how long it's taken me to get this video out since the Early Access release, as I've been spending quite a bit of time in the game getting the hang of it. Now in its current form, the game is a standard skirmish mode versus the AI, though there is an intent to add a campaign and multiplayer later. The campaign will have a story, however they are currently undecided if this will follow the books or if it will be more of their own story, but all of this will come in the future. Let's talk about the various aspects of the game itself. So first and foremost, obviously there are 4 factions in the game that you can play as. The Atreides, which are diplomacy focused, the Harkonnen or Harkonnen, depending on if you are a fan of the original author or the movies. They have the strongest military. Then there are the Smugglers, who are a new faction that have been added for the game and are quite economy focused. And then there are the Fremen, which are the faction based on the planet originally. And these are focused more on expansion and exploration, being able to use the planet's sandworms for transport of their forces. When you start a game, each faction has the option of 4 different councillors. They are specialised for each faction, and you can choose 2 of these to take into the game with you, and obviously I would suggest picking ones that fit your playstyle. As you get more used to the game, you will perhaps want to change this up and take something that gives you other benefits. When you first pick up the game, a good starting place would be any of them that give you an economic bonus of some kind, because the economy, which we'll move on to now, plays a huge role in the game. There is a massive focus on the economy, and learning to balance that is probably the most important part of the game when you start, in my opinion. This requires careful balancing, not just of your expansion, but also of research, the types of buildings you're building, and how you manage your military, as running low on any of the resources causes knock-on effects for everything else. One of the most important resources in the game is obviously spice, which can be kept as spice or converted into Solari, the game's currency, with a fluctuating exchange rate, and you have a slider which you will find yourself adjusting from time to time to make sure you are either getting more Solari or indeed more spice. Other important resources from all factions are the plascrete, manpower, and water, the latter of which is obviously especially important on a desert world. The Atreides, Harkonnen, and Smugglers also use power cells for various buildings and units upkeep. And that there is another important aspect to the economy. Pretty much everything in the game has an upkeep cost to stop you spamming particular units or buildings, and the game always forces you to aim for this balance as you expand. The truth is, once you get a handle on this part of the game, it is fairly easy to manage going forward. You just need to keep ahead of the curve and have enough access to compensate for any council votes that may increase your usage of various resources by up to 30%. Towns are a key part to accessing resources and obviously expanding your faction on the planet. Much like planets in Stellaris, these can be developed over time, though you don't have to wait for any population growth. You can take over towns via military force, or if you're the Atreides, you can also take it over diplomatically. This will cost you water and authority points, which are another resource in the game. The water is a recurring cost, while the authority is a once-off price. The game actually caps out at 500 authority, so eventually you simply won't be able to expand anymore as the cost to take a town will simply be too high. But there are various researchers that can lower this cost to allow further expansion. Some town areas will also have valuable resources, which will give a bonus to production of that type of resource. Some of these regions will also have an additional resource which allows you to produce Solari directly via a special building. In terms of water collection in the game, each region has a wind value. The higher the wind value, the more water you can collect via wind traps. There is also a center point on the map, which is a pole, and this has an ice cap which can be melted down to produce large amounts of water, and obviously this is a big resource for fighting over. Other than the resource buildings, there are also various military buildings, such as the airfield you can build in the towns, and also things which increase your intelligence or indeed your hegemony score. And much like these smaller towns you expand to, your capital city also has various upgrades. These upgrades are treated as districts within the capital city, and they provide huge bonuses to your faction depending on the type of building placed. Furthermore, filling a district with buildings from a particular type gives an additional bonus. Districts can vary between 1 and 3 buildings, and you will have to plan ahead of time which bonuses you want. Most of these buildings are very expensive and only unlocked via research, so again you have to plan in advance and ensure you are heading down the right research path if you want a particular building. Speaking of research, all factions have the same basic research or development options as the game calls it. However, each also has its own unique options within each tree. Those trees being intelligence, social, military and economic, or blue, green, red and orange. During my time with the game, I found the military and economic to be the most important, followed by social. Military because you simply can't do without it, you have to be able to protect your cities, and just having militia is certainly not enough against the bigger attacks from either raiders or indeed the enemy factions. Moreover, the amount of troops you can have is ruled by command points, and again you have to do military research to gain more command points and thus command more units, so this is a really important tree. Economic research is also very important because, as I say, there is a massive focus on the economy in this game, and indeed the requirement for you to constantly be paying an amount of spice every year, so doing the spice upgrades are very important here, as well as the research options which reduce your overall upkeep costs. The social or green research tree also had some very useful options, however I found myself going to this a lot less often and only picking and choosing a few of them. The intelligence was more often than not an afterthought, and this kind of fits into my thoughts on espionage and intelligence as a whole for the game at the moment. Espionage and intelligence gathering are something included in many 4X games, both real-time and turn-based, and it is often handled poorly. I found this aspect of Dune Spice Wars to be a little bit of a mixed bag at this stage. Over time you earn agents which can be placed in either other factions on the planet, or with groups off the planet such as the Landsrat Council, or indeed counterintelligence operations. Furthermore, some factions will use these agents for making alliances with the local sieges found all over the planet. The majority of espionage takes place via missions, which you set up and then activate at a later time. Some of these just cost intelligence points, while others cost intelligence and money. Some you need to have agents embedded with particular factions for. I mainly found myself using a lot of the basic ones, such as Ceasefire, which does what it says on the tin, and one that gave my units healing and supplies, and another that reduced enemy combat power. I suspect the more advanced and costly ones might be more fun used against other players rather than against the AI. Though this is also where you get the option to carry out assassination missions if you are going for a military victory, and will struggle to achieve that with just military power alone. As I say, I feel like this may come more into its own in multiplayer, but right now it still feels like a bit of an afterthought for me while I'm playing the game, and I'm focusing more on other options. Another aspect of the game which is a little bit hit and miss is trading and diplomacy. The trading is very basic. You can either trade resources as usual, or you can sign a couple of different treaties. The big thing for diplomacy, in my opinion, was the votes at the Landsrat Council. These made all the difference and were very interesting. Some of them give bonuses just to you, or indeed can penalise you or someone else, or there can be a bonus for everyone on the planet, or indeed a penalty for everyone in the planet, and different factions can interact with these in different ways. For example, the Fremen can spend their authority points to cause rebellions in enemy cities if a vote goes a particular way. The Atreides and the Harkonnen start with their own free votes and can also use influence points to further boost their votes, whereas the other factions will rely more on influence points to vote in the various elections. There is also the possibility to get a seat on the council. The various seats give different bonuses, and if you get the leader of the council seat, then you hold that for 60 days, and that is one of the ways you can actually win the game. Though hanging on to these can be difficult, as every other faction will attempt to dislodge you from these positions, and this happened to me once when I was about to win the game. Another aspect of the game which deserves a quick mention before we move on to combat, which I'll go into in a bit more detail, is the exploration and missions. Exploration of the planet yields its own rewards. Finding ruins and other objects to research or inspect gives you additional resources or reductions in research time. There are also timed missions that pop up on the left hand side of the screen, though I really wish they were more in your face, as if you are busy it can be easy to miss them or forget about them if you've seen them and don't go back to them. And these can have some very negative consequences for your faction if ignored, and I feel as though they're not prominent enough in the game at the moment, and sometimes it feels like a bit of an artificial way to be holding you back. But let's move on to the combat, which is obviously an important part of any of these games. The reality is the combat is fairly basic, but you can move units around, target specific enemy units to dish out the most damage and protect your more fragile units. For example, you can engage the enemy ranged units in melee combat, reducing their damage output. There are only 5 or 6 combat units per faction, and while they have similarities in that they all get a basic melee unit and at least one kind of ranged unit that drops the enemy armor, they are split up with units that react to numbers of enemies, how damaged they themselves are, or indeed ones that simply heal everything around them, amongst various other options. Factions are limited in military size by the command points as mentioned earlier, and each unit takes up a number of these points, which you obviously get back if they die. Military research can expand this number of points, but there's still an overall limit. There is one glaring issue with the combat in the game, and that's the fact that eventually you end up needing to pay to fly your troops all over the map, because you are constantly getting attacked at multiple sides, be it from the Fremen, be it from the other factions, be it from random raiders. Militia are often not enough to protect your towns most of the time, so you need to back them up, and you'll often suddenly get an attack on the other side of your territory while your army is elsewhere, and it becomes a constant issue of moving back and forth to protect your territory, which means that expansion at this point becomes difficult, and honestly it does get a bit frustrating. The Fremen don't have the option of air transports either. They rely on riding worms, which simply do not have the same travel distance capability, though of course the thumpers they use to do this are provided free over time. However, I just found them to be too slow at getting places compared to being able to move units across the entire map as the other factions. As I say, it did become very frustrating at times, rushing back and forth constantly, even with a larger force split into multiple smaller groups, and in fact I found myself on a couple of occasions saving and leaving the game till later because I'd had enough of it. I would say it's definitely something that needs looking at. The last thing to really talk about are the various victory conditions in the game. Firstly, there is the military victory. It is possible, but it is probably the most difficult to do. It's very hard to kill the enemy main cities due to their massive health pool and their very high armor. You can use the espionage to assassinate enemy leaders, but this is again expensive and time consuming. It's probably one of the longest drawn out ways to win right now. Another option to winning is becoming leader of the council. This is not too difficult to achieve as far as the victory conditions go. Once you fulfill the general requirements, aka having the right number of towns under your control and enough alliances with the Sietches, then you just have to have enough votes or influence to vote yourself in and stay there for 60 days. Which means not upsetting the council within that time and hoping no one drops your rating in some random council vote that pops up. The final way to win is via hegemony points, and this is probably the easiest way to win the game right now. You simply get there by gaining 25,000 points before anyone else. Though obviously this does take time and the other factions will be doing the same, hegemony points also unlock additional unique bonuses for your faction, so it's worth getting these regardless of what victory type you are going for, so they're going to tick up anyway. Overall, while the game has a few faults and some niggly things that need to be worked out, I've had a lot of fun playing it. I've had a chance to try all the factions now, and generally the gameplay is very similar for each faction, with some minor differences, but basically if you can play one, then you should be able to jump in and play the others and get on well enough. Though they all have their specific areas of strength. Now, if you're a fan of games like Stellaris, then you'll certainly enjoy it, and I'm excited to see how it progresses through the rest of Early Access. Right now it has a very solid foundation, as can be seen by its many positive reviews on Steam. The players are enjoying it. My only real complaints right now are how combat can become a bit of a rushing back and forth across your territory at some points, and often I found myself defaulting to the hegemony point win because it was less hassle than the other ways to win, and frankly they just weren't as fun yet. For an early access game, I encountered very few bugs. I did get a little bit of slowdown and drops in frame rate, but I would hope that that is optimized closer to release. Multiplayer being added will make a huge difference to this game, and will likely both show areas the game will shine, and also further areas for improvement, as humans will play very differently to the AI. For example, I really think this is where the espionage will come into its own. I really look forward to the further updates, and I'll certainly be revisiting the game in the future, especially once we get some multiplayer action. Have any of you guys played the game? Let me know in the comments down below. I'm really curious what you think the game does well, what you think it does badly, and where there's room for improvement. Thanks all for watching. Please do like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you all soon.